Leadership. The objective of this lecture is to make the students learn about the concept of leadership, leadership styles and theories. By the completion of this lecture, the student will be able to understand the background of the term of leadership, the definition of leadership, leadership style, and approaches to study of leadership styles. Introduction. There is a profound difference between manager and leader, and both are essential in a sound management system. To manage means to bring about, to accomplish, to have charge of or responsibility for, to conduct. On the other hand, the leading is influencing, guiding, in direction, course, action, and opinion. The distinction is critical. Managers are people who do things right, and leaders are people who do the right thing. In this lesson, you will learn that leadership is a very complex, intricate art that is essential for the success in mission. In fact, your knowledge of effective leadership principles and concepts, coupled with their application at your workplace, may prove to be rewarding both professionally and personally. Let us start with simple definition of leadership. Leadership is the process of influencing an organized group towards a common goal. This definition sounds easy, but the application can provide a real challenge. Leaders' goals in the organization is to do the best job you can at influencing your people towards a common goal. Since you are dealing with a very diverse group of people, it is important to understand the different approaches to motivate them to meet their goals. Leadership style is the pattern of behaviors you use when you are trying to influence the behavior of those you are trying to lead. Each leadership style can be identified with a different approaches to problem solving and decision making. Possessing a better understanding of the various leadership styles and their respective developmental levels will help you match a given style for a specific situation. The challenge is to master the ability to change your leadership style for a given situation as the person development levels change. Let's answer the following question. How can you help your followers increase their development level? Given the following 4 points or instructions in helping followers to improve their development level. 1. Explain to them what you want to get done. 2. Provide the guidance they might need before they start. 3. Give them the opportunity to complete the task on their own. 4. Give them a lot of positive encouragement. Your goal should be to help your followers increase their competence and commitment to independently accomplish the tasks assigned to them, so that gradually you can begin to use less time-consuming styles and still get high-quality results. Your organization depends on positive, effective leaders at all levels to perform the mission. There is no single leadership style that is appropriate in every situation. Therefore, for you to be effective leaders, you need to learn to understand your environment, your situation, and the circumstances to help you act accordingly. Your success as a leader will depend on your assessment of the situation and your ability to communicate what you want in such a way that others will do as you wish. That is the start of leadership. Definition of leadership. It is difficult to define the term leadership. However, as a starting point, we may proceed with the workable definition that a leader is the one who leads others and is able to carry an individual or a group towards the accomplishment of a common goal. He is able to influence their behavior because he enjoys some power over them. They are willing to be influenced because they have certain needs to satisfy in collaboration with him. French and Raven have proposed the following basis of power for person exerting influence. 1. Legitimate. That the targets of influence, followers or subordinates, understand that the power the leader enjoys is legitimate and they should comply with his orders in order to meet their own goals. Reward. That the followers know that the leader has the power to grant promotions, monetary inducements, or other rewards if his orders are complied with. Coercive. That the followers know that if the leader's orders are not complied with, he has the power to fire, expel, and discharge the followers. Expect. That the followers know that the leader possesses a specialist's knowledge in the field they lack it. Referent. That the followers feel attracted towards him because of his amiable manners, pleasing personality, or they feel that he is well connected with high-ups. It is apparent then that the first three power bases indicate positional power, which one derives from one's position. The other two indicate personal power, which is based on the individual's own characteristics. In any case, the leader exercises his influence because of one or more of these types of power and obtain compliance from the followers. How far he succeeds in his attempts will depend upon several other factors that we'll discuss during the course of this lecture. Leadership is therefore regarded as the process of influencing the activities of an individual or a group in efforts towards goal achievement in a given situation. This process, Hesse and Blanchard suggest, can be explained in the form of the following equation. L depends on LFS. Function. That is, the leadership is a function of the leader, L, the followers, F, and other situational variables, S. One who exercises this influence is a leader, whether he is a manager in a formal organization, an informal leader in an informal group, or the head of a family. It is undoubtedly true that a manager may be a weak leader, or a leader may a weak manager. But it is also equally probable that a manager may be a true leader, or a leader may be a true manager. A manager who is a true leader as well is always desirable. Situational variables include the whole environment, like the task, the group, organizational policies, etc. Leadership styles. Leadership style is the way a managerial leader applies his influence in getting work done through his subordinates in order to achieve the organizational objectives. The main attitude or beliefs that influences leadership style is the perceived role of the manager versus the role of the subordinate. It depends upon the role of the leader whether he likes to work more of a colleague, facilitator, and decision maker. On the other hand, the response of the subordinate will determine the particular style to be in application. Broadly speaking, there are three basic leadership styles: autocratic or dictatorial leadership. In this leadership style, the leader assumes full responsibility for all actions. Mainly, he relies on implicit obedience from the group in following his orders. He determines plan and policies and makes the decision making a one-man show. He maintains very critical and negative relations with his subordinates. He freely uses threats of punishment and penalty for any lack of obedience. This kind of leadership has normally very short life. Number 2, democratic leadership. In this case, the leader draws ideas and suggestions from his group by discussion, consultation, and participation. He secures consensus or anonymity in decision making. Subordinates are duly encouraged to make any suggestion as a matter of their contribution in decision making and to enhance their creativity. This kind of leadership style is liked in most civilized organizations and has very long life. Number 3, laissez-faire, free-rein leadership. Quite contrary to a Socratic leadership style. In this leadership style, the leader depends entirely on his subordinates to establish their own goals and to make their own decisions properly. He lets them plan, organize, and proceed. He takes minimum initiative in administration or information. He is there to guide the subordinate if they are in a problem. This kind of leadership is desirable in mainly professional organizations and where the employees are self-motivated. Leader works here just as a member of the team. We shall now discuss the roots of such leadership style. Shall try to understand as to how these different leadership styles have been evolved by the management scholars. Approaches to the leadership styles. There are broadly 3 major approaches to the study of the leadership phenomenon. Attempts have been made to understand this phenomenon by studying traits of the leader, behavior of the leader, situations in which leadership is exercised. The trait approach was followed during 1930 up to 1960. The behavioral approach attempts to explain leader behavior in terms of his styles or practices, but altogether neglected the follower and situation characteristics. Therefore, an approach called the situational approach, which had the potential to incorporate important variables, developed during the 1970s. trait approach. There have always been very few persons in society or organization who are leaders. The vast majority of people constitute the followers. But what is it that distinguishes leaders from non-leader? Or what makes a person the successful leader? It is perhaps something that is inborn in him and which the followers lack. This approach stresses the inborn qualities or characteristics of an individual. One way to identify the traits is to ask the leader himself how he considers himself different from his followers, or what distinguishing characteristics he possesses. Another way is to analyze the past and the present of the leader in terms of his family background, education, career, events, etc., and build up a list of traits or attributes that the leader possesses. In most cases, a leader's life becomes highly interesting only when he has emerged as a leader. This compilation of a list of traits or attributes does not give any predictive power, and therefore investigators have tended to relate leadership even with handwriting. Graphology, skull shape, phrenology, and occult influence of stars astrology. A number of studies have been conducted to identify traits or characteristics that can be used to distinguish successful from unsuccessful leaders or followers. As Ivanovich et al. Have cited, the most researched traits include the following: physical characteristics, age, appearance, and health; social background, education, social status and mobility; intelligence, judgment, knowledge, decisiveness and fluency of speech; personality, alertness, dominance, extraversion, independence, creativity, and self-confidence. Task-related characteristics: achievement drive, initiative, persistence, enterprise, and task orientation. Social characteristics: attractiveness, popularity, sociability, and interpersonal skills. Different studies have identified different number of traits. With each study, the list of traits studied has become longer and longer. Some traits are, however, common to all the studies. In general, there appears to be a consensus that effective leaders possess intelligence, social maturity, and breeds inner motivation and achievement drive, and a human relations attitude. However, inability to value the followers' ideas, poor human relations, display of emotional immaturity, and poor communication skills have been regarded as dysfunctional to effective leadership. Let us criticize this approach. The trade approach is weak in several respects. But before we list the basic criticism, we should like to give some examples of leadership that will themselves throw up the main shortcomings of this approach. Mahatma Gandhi states, a real man, not even adequately clothed but wedded to truth, became the father of the Indian nation. A short stature person, after becoming the prime minister, used to be an object of amusement, but not very long thereafter, when the Indian army marched into Pakistan territory, he became a hero and died at the Haiti while negotiating a settlement. Our purpose is not a comment upon anyone's leadership, but to highlight the fact that the leader remaining the same, his effectiveness has varied in different situations. His or her important characteristics are given, but whether one succeeds or fails as leader perhaps depends upon something else. It seems a person is at his best when he comes across a situation which needs. Further, not many things were common among those who succeed or fail. Let's list some criticisms points. There is no finite set of traits to distinguish successful from unsuccessful leaders. 2. It is difficult to indicate what mix of traits is necessary to make an effective leader. Its measurement is problematic. 3. No consistent leadership is discernible between attributes and leader behavior. 4. This approach stresses the important qualities or characteristics of individuals and therefore in turn questions the value of training individuals to assume leadership positions. Training may help improve a person if he possesses the basic traits. Therefore, it was essential first to identify those who possess these traits and then impart training only to such persons. Accordingly to this approach, training would be fruitless in the case of others. This view seems to be inappropriate in the light of aforesaid criticisms and inconsistent with the result of training programs. Different traits appear necessary for different roles even in the same organization. At lower managerial levels, whether there is a direct contact between the workers and the supervisors, technical knowledge is of paramount importance. at middle management level, where they interpret and elaborate policies. Human relation skills are more important than technical knowledge. At higher managerial levels, where ideas are generated, policies are framed, strategic and long-term planning is undertaken. Additional source processing, conceptual skills gain preeminent position. Organizations compete not with products, with people. Leadership in a large organization demands a specialized limited role, but a multiplicity of roles has to be played in a small organization. The average does not consider what the leader does, ignores followers and their effect on the leader. It requires an initial separation of people into leaders and non-leaders, or good leaders and not so good leaders. 9. When an individual is faced with a problem, then only the presence or absence of the traits required in that situation becomes known. There is therefore an increasing recognition of wide variation in the characteristics of individuals who become leaders in similar situations and of even greater divergence in the traits of leaders working in different situations. Despite its shortcomings, no approach is entirely worthless. It is on the basis of its weakness that the foundation of new approaches are laid. The traits approach paved the way for later approaches, like the behavioral and situational. Behavioral approach. When it was apparent that the trait basis was not adequate to explain the leadership phenomenon, the theorists directed their attention to the study of leader behavior. This approach was advocated during 1950s up to 1960s. The roots of this approach lie in how the management viewed the workers, and the spell of the traditional management approach. Men were regarded as inert appendages to the machine. It was the function of management to coerce, direct, and motivate them through the offer of economic rewards. Management attempted to reduce wastes of time and material to increase efficiency, and no consideration was shown to men as assets. In other words, a philosophy was that people were by nature lazy, uncreative, and irresponsible. Also, leadership has to be directive. However, during the 1930s, the Hobson experiment exploded the myth of management thinking. Mayo and his associates discovered the existence of informal group and informal leaders, and laid stress on interpersonal relationship as a significant influence of productivity. Therefore, scientific management advocates ignore human behavior and express sole concern for output, whereas the human relation movement showed an overriding concern for people. These two movements gave birth to leadership studies, which characterize leaders as basically adopting a particular leadership style, say dictatorial, autocratic, authoritarian, democratic, supportive, consultative, participative, or less varying types. These studies were organized to examine the impact of a particular leadership style over individual and group behavior. The dictatorial leaders was one who had absolute authority and used threats and punishment to extract work out of people. An authoritarian leader was the one who claimed his recourse to authority vested in him to hire, fire, and reward people. He issued direction and maintained formal relationship with people. Democratic or participative leaders consider subordinates' views in organizational matters, provided guidance on their work problems, and emotionally involve themselves in helping workers achieve organizational as well as individual goals. The laissez faire of free-rein leaders supplied information to the group members, but displayed little emotional involvement and a minimum of participation in the group activities. He lets them decide themselves without laying down any procedures. This amounts to virtual absence of formal leadership or is analogous to abdication of responsibilities. Let's see some approaches. University of Michigan Studies. The Institute for Social Research at the University of Michigan conducted a number of studies to identify styles of leaders' behavior that result in increased work group performance and satisfaction. Their studies resulted in the development of two distinct styles of leadership: the job-centered, task-oriented leadership style, emphasizing the use of rules, procedures, and close supervision of subordinates. 2. The employee-centered, relationship-oriented leadership style, emphasizing delegation of authority and responsibility and concern for employee welfare, needs, advancement, and personal growth. The use of both styles led to increase in production, but it was slightly higher in the case of the job-centered leadership style. However, the use of direct pressure and close supervision led to decreased satisfaction and increased turnover and absenteeism. The employee-centered approach led to improved work flow procedures and more coherent interaction. The employee-centered approach led to improved work flow, procedures, and more cohesion in interaction. This resulted in increased satisfaction and decreased turnover and absenteeism. This fact would obviously suggest the superiority of the employee-centered leadership style. Let's criticize this approach. A serious point of criticism is that these studies fail to point out of whether leader behavior is the cause or effect. It suggests leader behavior to be one particular type of static, whereas in practice it changes from situation to situation. The use of a questionnaire completed by subordinate introduces an element of employee behavior. In it and bias in it and may not present the true view of the leadership style. As in trait approach, these studies also did not take into account the nature of the subordinate task or the personnel characteristics, group characteristics, or other situational variables. Ohio State Studies, initiated in 1945, the Bureau of Business Research study by Fleischman and others. Ohio State University identified two independent leadership dimensions called initiating, structure, and consideration, which meant more or less the same thing as task behavior and relationship behavior of a leader. These concepts were identified as a result of two types of questionnaire: leader behavior description questionnaire, completed by peers, superiors, and subordinates, to leader opinion questionnaire, scored by the leaders themselves. The score derived from the responses to the questionnaire were used to indicate a manager style leadership. Fleischman and Harris suggest there must be certain critical levels beyond which increased consideration or decreased structure have no effect on grievance or turnover rates, but leader behavior characterized by low consideration is more critical than behavior characterized by high structure. Apparently, a manager can compensate for high structure by increased consideration, but a low consideration manager cannot compensate by decreasing his structuring behavior. The Ohio studies and Michigan studies were being carried out at the same time, but the Ohio studies mark a break from the rest in the sense that instead of a single continuum, they used two separate dimensions. This was a significant step forward in itself. However, these studies suffered from more or less the same weaknesses as the Michigan studies. A few of such weaknesses are listed. The studies again did not consider the situational factor and the influence of these factors on leaders' effectiveness. The use of two questionnaires, one to be completed by the subordinates and the other by the leaders themselves, has also come in for severe criticism. Last managerial grid study. Black and Mountain have used concern for production and concern for people in their managerial grid on horizontal and vertical axes respectively. These two terms convey the same meaning as used in the Ohio State studies, with the difference that concern form shows a predisposition about something, and so is in attitudinal dimension, whereas initiating structure and consideration represent all behaviors as perceived by others, and so on. The final look at behavioral theory. As distinct from the trait approach, behavioral theory endeavored to explain the leadership phenomenon in terms of the behavior of the leader. What the leader does was regarded as more important than the leader's personal characteristics. Therefore, the investigators examined the practices or styles that leaders adopted in and gave the impression that a leader had dominant philosophy. A leader was easier say authoritarian or democratic. For the first time, the Ohio State studies considered two independent leadership dimensions and revealed that leadership style could be any mix of the two dimensions. This research no doubt advanced our knowledge, but it stressed on effective leader behavior being characterized by high initiating structure and high consideration, or ineffective leader behavior being marked by low scores on both dimension, however seems misplaced. There is a lot of evidence to question this inference. In the military organization during wartime in the field, a high initiating structure and low consideration style would be most appropriate. A similar parallel may be drawn in the case of the firefighting department when a house is on fire. In the light of these facts, the search for the most effective leadership style appears to be a wild goose chase. Behavioral approach advance our knowledge in understanding the leadership phenomenon by explaining various combinations of leadership style. What characteristics an individual possesses did not explain his emergence as a leader, nor did it explain what mix of traits one should have to prove effective if one happens to be placed in a leadership position. The trait approach in effect explains some of the desirable characteristics that leaders had or a leader should have, but it's called not suggest with certainty. that one who possesses particular characteristics shall be a leader. The behavior approach, learning from the weaknesses of the trait approach, went a step further to explain the practices available to a leader in order to discharge his leadership dimension are available. But this again failed to indicate the best style of leadership, which was universally appropriate. As a result, it was recognized that it is not style that matters. In fact, no style is good or bad. It is the situation that makes it so. What makes a style to be effective or ineffective is the situational difference. The behavioral approach failed to consider this situation as an important element. It merely thought of various leadership practices that prove productive or not so productive, but it did not consider its why. It is therefore clear that it is not matter of the best style, but of what style is likely to be effective in a particular situation. What is relevant for an industrial setting may not be relevant for an educational institution. What is relevant for an administrative office in an educational institution may not be relevant for the teaching staff. A number of leader behavior styles may be effective or ineffective depending on the importance element of the situation. Leader behavior is affected by several situational factors like managerial characteristics, subordinate characteristics, group factors, organizational factors, etc., which in fact constitute the environment of the leader. It is difficult to list all these factors, but it suggests that leadership is a very complex process. The situational theories attempt to provide at least partial examination of how these factors impact on leadership. Fielder's contingency theory. Fielder contingency theory specifies that the performance of a group is contingent upon both the motivational system of the leaders and the degree to which the leader has control and influence in a particular situation. That is, a leader effectiveness is contingent upon the favorableness or unfavorableness of the situation. The favorableness of the situation is dependent upon leader-member relation, the task structure, and leadership position. Leader-member relations. This variable measures the referent power of the leader, whether the group accepts or rejects him as its leader. Task structure. If the task is highly specific, can be done only in one way, and the rules and procedures for the task are clearly laid down, leaving no scope for different interpretation. It is said to be highly structured. In this situation, the leader's ability to influence the group is restricted because the task the leader potential influence. Leader position power. This indicates that the extent to which the leader possesses reward, punishment, and legitimate power basis. In most business organizations, leaders have high position power. Thus, the whole idea can be summarized as follows. Leadership style effectiveness is contingent upon task-oriented, favorable leadership situation, unfavorable leadership situation. Relationship oriented situation intermediate in favorableness for the leader. So an integrative model of leadership. We have examined various approaches to study and understand the leadership phenomenon. The trait approach identified the traits only when a person had emerged as a leader and therefore it had no predictive power. Learning from the weaknesses of the trait approach, the foundation of the behavior approach were laid, but this approach only concentrated on leader behavior as if it was occurring in a vacuum while other variables were ignored. Situational theories attempt to fill in this gap, but no single theory can ever accommodate all the variables, and as more and more elaborate theories are advanced, their complexity increases. This fact reduces their applicability in practice. In fact, leadership is such a complex phenomenon that even after integrating the knowledge generated by the formulation and testing of various approaches to the study of leadership, we are not yet near the solution. However, to have a full view of the present state of knowledge in this area, we may talk about an integrative model of leadership as developed by Ivanovich. Amal. It is beyond doubt that your goals as a leader in the organization is to do the best job you can at influencing your people towards a common goal. Since you are dealing with a very diverse group of people, it is important to understand the different approaches to motivate them to meet their goals. Leadership style is a pattern of behaviors you use when you are trying to influence the behaviors of those you are trying to lead. Each leadership style can be identified with a different approach to problem solving and decision making. Possessing a better understanding of the various leadership styles and their respective developmental levels will help you match a given style for a specific situation. The challenge is to master the ability to change your leadership style for a given situation as the person's development levels change. Some modern management scholars, like Ivanovich, have identified three major issues in leadership, which have received only scant attention from researchers and theorists. These issues include leader reward behavior, the causal relationship between leader behavior and subordinate behavior, substitutes for leadership. Management scholars have generally examined the effect of leadership style on subordinate behavior and have rarely related it to the leader reward behavior. But whatever little research exists on this issue has shown the strengths of the leadership relationship between the positive leader reward behavior and subordinate satisfaction and performance to be significantly greater than that reported for relationships involving the leader style component. Similarly, the use of negative rewards has been found to have different effects on subordinates depending on the individual's organizational level. At higher levels, because of ambitious and vague description of the tasks, negative rewards are reported to be motivational, whereas at lower levels, where tasks are clearly defined, they cause dissatisfaction. Another interesting issue, though neglected, is whether subordinates' behavior of a particular type is a consequence of leader behavior, or that leader behavior is a consequence of subordinate behavior of a particular type. It an outcome or a cause? Is it an outcome or a cause? Any effort that examines these relationships will be of great interest to managers and in behavioral scientists. The third issue concerns our frequent assumption that the subordinates are dependent upon the leader for direction, support, influence, and rewards. In practice, experience and job expertise, professional education and training, help from co-workers and peers, specification of rules, procedures, and policies, etc., may reduce the subordinate dependency on the leaders. This does not belittle the importance of leadership. On the other hand, it suggests that individual employees may also be influenced in their work by factors other than leader behavior. Towards the conclusion of this lecture, it can be summed up that there is no single leadership style that could be most appropriate in every situation. Therefore, for you to be effective leaders, you need to learn and to understand your environment, your situation, and the circumstances to help you act accordingly. Remember, your success as a leader will depend on your assessment of the situation and your ability to communicate what you want in such a way that others will do as you wish. That is the art of leadership.